Hello, everyone. We're back again. I'm Seth Holler, CEO of WISER Systems.
And I am Logan Maxwell, wearer of many hats.
And here today, we're going to talk about a use case. And this use case is with Crystal Group. Why don't we set the stage? So this Crystal Group had a facility and they had a number of uses. And so when they deployed the system, they tried to cover all those uses at once. Do you want to kind of do the introduction there?
Sure. Yeah. And even to take a few steps back, it's a shop, a facility, and it's one of those facilities that's what we would call small to medium size, right? So this isn't a global chain enterprise situation where there's like 14 different facilities across the world. They had one main shop. And they do one thing, right? They're going to make ruggedized display units, right? And that's what they make. So they're in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And yeah, they were looking for a system to provide location. But the thing was, they had multiple different types of items that they needed the location for, right?
Right.
And why they're looking for those items is different in a lot of those cases, right? So I'm going to look for these at different times for different reasons, and they're different assets altogether. So to go over those essentially, right?
Yeah, sure. And these are very different use cases. So it's interesting how they came together and decided on these three use cases. Because sometimes companies are departmentalized, like they will be solely focused on a single use case, and there could be other use cases, but they have their blinders on and they focus on one. So
yeah,
Crystal is a little bit different, where they understood right away the three use cases available.
Yeah, and kudos to them. As you said, a lot of times there are kind of blinders in that way, right? Like we get a lot of inquiries where it's like, I want to track this thing, and their whole dedication and team is dedicated to that. We see that in a lot of times larger entities oftentimes will have not talked with everyone because it's so difficult to get all of the consensus. So it may be, in a way, these smaller and medium-sized manufacturers can kind of get everybody in a group. What are you trying to track? What are you trying to track? What are you trying to track? As opposed to having 14 different sites with a competing vision of the RTLS landscape. So.
Well, let's just jump right into it. So what are the three use cases?
Yes. So for Crystal in particular, and we see this at different shops, different use cases. Usually they're going to have one of these, but they have all three at once, which is really interesting. So they have a calibrated gauges and tools that they use on and off the line to manufacture. Those need to be calibrated, and so they need to find them. They have government-owned assets that are used in the production process of their screens. They need to keep track of those and audit those. And they also have the screens that they're making, right? The work in process as it's being made. Where are all of those items? So they have kind of all three. Now we have shops where they'll only be tracking gauges and test equipment, right? But we have shops that do inventory assets, and we have shops that do WIP. But it's nice because they do all three at once in one facility.
So let's get down to the numbers. How large of a facility is this, roughly?
Roughly speaking, I wish I had the square footage ahead of time before we hopped in front of the camera. But imagine kind of a standard small to medium-sized manufacturer. And we're talking somewhere between 100 and 200,000 square feet.
Okay.
Like
and then on the calibrated tools, like, can you speak a little bit to how many of each they're tracking?
Yeah, hundreds of each. I think in total we're around 1,000 total assets, give or take. But yeah, a few hundred of each type of asset.
Okay. And then, so would you say the tags are roughly split, like a third into calibrated tools, a third into WIP, and
Yeah, I think give or take. I think there's a little bit more calibrated gauges and tooling than there are others, but yeah, something like a 40, 30, 30, something like that.
And why is it important to track the calibrated gauges?
So yeah, starting there. If you're familiar, you tune out for the next 30 seconds because you are intimately familiar with this process and why it's a PITA. But gauges need to be calibrated to stay in spec, right? And these are things that you measure with, or even test equipment. It doesn't have to be a physical gauge of measurement. It can be an electronic form of measurement. They all have to be constantly monitored to be in spec, because the items that you're creating are dependent on those measurements to be in specification themselves. So if we're putting a part onto a car or an airplane or an electrical generator, we need to make sure it's operating the way it should be when we're putting that unit together. So we're going to take these tools, gauges in this case, and we're going to measure with them. All right. So usually that cadence is once a year, sometimes more, sometimes less.
But these are hand tools sometimes.
Hand tools.
And they can be anywhere in the facility.
Right. So we're grabbing them and using them. Think about a year's worth of time that this can
look at your schedule and 1 year is up and you have to find calibrated gauge XYZ.
Right.
And it could literally be anywhere in the facility.
Usually. I mean, of course, there's some hot spots that you would initially look, right? And so a lot of times we're going to have a list every week to 2 weeks. There are actually whole software programs dedicated to tracking when these calibrations are due, right? So they have their own software platforms and suites that tell you when is that calibration due, and they give you a list. And it can be a one person's entire job, if not multiple people in these facilities, to run and look for these gauges.
So
right?
The savings on the calibrated gauge side is people no longer have to spend hours and hours and hours finding these tools so that they can be calibrated again. Right. With the WISER system, you simply pull up a map, you know where it is, you walk to it, and you retrieve it to calibrate it. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yep. So we're essentially, you can think of it almost like the WIP context that we're in, except instead of looking for WIP, you're looking for these gauges. You have a list, right? Instead of being a project manager and trying to find where all your pieces are, you're a project manager of that gauge. And you're saying, every week I've got a list of 20 and I need to go find all those, make sure I get them to the calibration and get them out of calibration. And so this is a tool they can use. Simply type in the gauge in the upper left of WISER's screen. Boop, there it is on the map. I know I can go get it. Beyond that, you can even monitor that it's made it to the calibration station and that it's made it back out onto the floor after the calibration station. And even beyond that, because we have APIs, you can actually automate this whole process by combining it with your existing eGauge software tracking platform if you have that as an open API as well. So you can go pretty far there, but a lot of times, all you have to do, type in the gauge at the top of the screen, hit enter, there it is. So.
But what you're saying is there's so much more beyond that you could do. But at least on the first level, you can find and retrieve.
Track and find. It is truly just saved hours, right? You know.
And clearly with calibrated gauges, that kind of implies that you have work product that's going through and being tested. And sometimes the test fails and it has to do some sort of rework. Is that right?
Right.
So it's no longer a linear process flow for making things. It has checkpoints and it has to circle back, and things get complicated quickly. Is that right?
Right. And so a lot of times when you have test equipment and gauges, you have a cellular-based nonlinear manufacturing process, which tends to be where we end up being used anyway. So a lot of times we're going to see these in conjunction. You're using this on your test equipment and gauges. Well, go ahead and put it on your WIP as well. And Crystal is a really good use of this, is that they're taking the tags and they're also putting it on the work in process, right?
Right.
And in their case, it's actually a little different than a lot of times. We're tracking WIP a lot of times to measure how long it was in this station, how long it was in this station, and then the project managers and production managers can run and find the parts they need to find and get them through the flow faster. On the Crystal side, it's actually from the customer service. So they're getting calls and they say, how long will it be till I get my 40 or 400 ruggedized screens for the things that I'm putting them into? I need to know when this is going to come to me because it's a component part of a larger assembly, right? So the screen themselves are assemblies and complicated. Well, they're going into another complicated device. I need to know when I'm going to get them. I'm going to call Crystal. Where are those? Without an RTLS system, it becomes very difficult to know, right? And you start making calls on the floor, walking the floor, right?
So this is a great pivot. So it's not necessarily for improving production efficiency, which by all means it does.
Yeah.
But there's a customer service aspect where the customer calls and they can tell the customer exactly where it is and have more insight into when it will be delivered. Is that right?
Exactly. You can tell them exactly what part of the process it's on, and because of that, you can give a much better time estimate of when it will be delivered and finished. Or ultimately, even at a black and white binary case, you can tell them whether it's still in the building or whether it's in shipping and receiving. So it's coming from the customer service side, which we do see. We just see less often than the production side as well.
And a lot of this happens where with becomes a little harder to find when you have these nonlinear or sort of cell-based manufacturing process where there's kind of a test and repeat element to it.
Exactly. So that ties in with the gauges and the test equipment, right? Where now, if it fails, I need to send it back, so I can't have a linear flow. By definition, there's recycle flows as part of that process.
And then the last point is keeping track of certain government-owned equipment. Is that right?
Yes, and you can think of these similar to the gauges we talked about before, but these are very special, sensitive instruments that are actually owned by the government and lent to this facility to produce defense-related material. And so these are things that have to be kept track of. If you have a malactor or somebody that's looking to gain secrets, they could grab one of these and have at least a little bit more additional information on how we create these defense-related items. And so these have to be kept in a secure room, right? They're actually kept in a closet, and they call it the GOA closet, government-owned assets. And when those are taken in and out, they need to make sure they know when and who.
So like a check-in procedure.
Right. Check in and check out. And before that would all be manually done and become very cumbersome in a way of I'm checking this in and out. And honestly, not to call the government on them, but it becomes very difficult when you're out of your work hours, right? Somebody needs this, they're going to go in the closet and grab it, take it, do their work, and come back, right? So you're not getting 100%.
So compliance is sometimes an issue.
Yes, and truly the compliance tends to be just black and white, where is it, right? And in that case, every time that compliance comes through, whether it be quarterly or monthly, WISER now allows you to just say, well, there they all are, right? As opposed to having to run around and find
an instant audit.
Right. Essentially, it's an instantaneous audit. So instead of, hey, I went and checked in the closet, I have 88 out of 90. Where are the last two? Let's go run around and look for them. You now can just see exactly where all of them are, and so you can do that audit pretty much immediately.
So essentially, any company that does manufacturing, say for the government or for defense, understands this issue with keeping track of government-owned assets, or GOAs, correct?
Yeah, I suppose so. It really depends on what you're making, right? If you're making a metallic substructure that's going to go into a wing assembly or something, you wouldn't have GOA. But if you're making any sort of sensitive electronics, avionics, things that have to be tested to that nature, or especially if you have antennas or receptivity, things that are calling and responding, those have to be tested to that mil spec. And so you would likely have some of those at your facility. So it's not everywhere, but yeah, everyone's going to know. If you're watching this video, you already know, especially about the gauges.
Yeah, if you're in manufacturing and you're doing this, you definitely know it. You either know it or you don't. Like you're either in this world or you're not.
Yeah, and most people are going to have WIP. If you have cellular, that's what you're going to be tracking, right? Cellular-based manufacturing, nonlinear manufacturing, but if you've got these gauges, it's a PITA to go run around and get them, especially when you start to have hundreds of them. Think about facilities with thousands of them, right? So it's a big time sink, and it can be of value just to eliminate those hours, right? Really, honestly, that alone can pay for the system. It's just really fun that we have sites that have multiple all entwined.
Yes, I was going to say Crystal Group is interesting in that they recognize this first before doing implementation of all three of them. We get many companies who do an implementation with one of these use cases and then slowly build them out.
Right.
But in this case, it's interesting that they were able to do it all simultaneously. So it kind of speaks to the high-level awareness that Crystal Group had when they started.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a great benefit when you do RTLS projects like this to pull in kind of a larger group of players, because RTLS systems, at their essence, do dots on the map, they do tracking, and there are so many applications. So while you might have one use case where the ROI becomes that much better when you pull in multiple groups for multiple use cases.
Dare I say, we are at time.
Oh, we are at time. So thank you all. Appreciate your time in this video today. And we'll talk to you again.
Yeah, appreciate it.